Canada is the only developed country in the world without a national housing strategy.
Poor housing is associated with higher rates of infectious disease and poorer mental health.
The landlord called me one night and he said, "We want to do renovations on that apartment, so you have to get out."
I just don't know how I'm going to be able to afford it. Money will have to come from my food budget.
We are not prepared at all to house our aging population in Antigonish.
You've got to stop the university from ruining this town. They're putting up these new residences.
They made a few comments about us being poor people, and so be it.
They seem to look down on us.
We're in the business of trying to make a profit.
Often it's an unpopular topic to talk about.
I think this community is a very proud community, and I think that sometimes the pride gets in the way of accepting the reality that actually is here.
Antigonish is a beautiful little town nestled in the rolling hills of northeastern Nova Scotia. It's the Highland heart of Nova Scotia. It's a university town, so the population roughly doubles between September and May. That has huge implications for the rental housing market in a small town like this. I'm Katherine Reed, and I work at the Antigonish Women's Resource Centre, and I am the project coordinator for the Antigonish Affordable Housing Project, which is funded by the Rural Communities Foundation of Nova Scotia. I moved to Antigonish in 1983 with my two kids who were 6 and 8 at the time. I moved here to become a student at St. FX, and so, like other students, we had to rent housing wherever we could find it. We had good and bad experiences. Bad was the place we lived in where we were almost poisoned with carbon monoxide because the way the house had been jury-rigged, and we were quite lucky to have woken up at all. Once I graduated and started working at the Women's Centre in '88, I started naturally helping women coming in with housing issues and poverty issues, because I had not only lived the experience of being poor and being a single parent and living in bad housing and that I couldn't afford, but I had also studied in university some courses in the humanities and understood the structural perspective on poverty. And then I was now working in a situation where I was helping women who every day were coming through the Women's Centre saying, "Can you help me find a place that I can afford?" And we couldn't really, because that just didn't exist.
By the fact that the university is here, we have a housing problem.
Yeah.
Because every September we go from a town of around 4,000 to a town of around 8,000,
yeah,
with 4,000 students coming to town. And the university, until now, hasn't been able to house all of those students, and they end up going into the town and taking, of course, what they can get. And often students will bunk in, and you get 3 or 4 in one place. They can then afford to spend $200 or $300 each a month, and they're buying up, as it were, the properties that would otherwise go to low-income families who need affordable housing.
There are like 600 people using social services, welfare. There are over 700 people using the food bank. This has been going on in Antigonish for as long as I've been here. We have 33 units of public housing in the town and county of Antigonish. More people on the wait list for those units than there are units available. And about availability of those units, they're not available, because when people manage to finally get in there, they don't move because they need that low-cost housing.
My name is Ann Tatro, and this is my common law spouse, Jerry McLaughlin. We have 4 children, 2 girls, ages 18 and 17, and 2 boys, 16 and 15. When we first moved to Antigonish, we had 2 awesome landlords, I should say. Compared to these last 2 landlords that we had, oh.
We had no other choice but to move into another house, the only house that was available at the time, that was supposed to be cleaned and things were supposed to be fixed. When we received the key for that home, we went up and nothing was done.
We had signed the lease and everything. We took the pictures, we brought them down to the landlord. We made agreements with them that after the painting supplies was reimbursed and the hours that we worked on the house, the rent would be $800. She signed it.
I'm Connie Clement. I'm the Scientific Director at the National Collaborating Center for the Determinants of Health. We do know that poor housing is associated with higher rates of infectious disease, higher rates of chronic disease, higher rates of injuries, and poorer mental health. Those ill health effects that are related with housing are disproportionately felt by individuals living in poverty, by First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, by immigrants, by senior citizens, and I would say disproportionately, I'm worried about the effect on children because of the lifelong impact of living in that poorer housing.
My name is Holly Hiltz, and I'm 20 years old. And when I was 17, I had my daughter, Renesmee Hiltz. And I was 17 when I first got my own house. I was actually living with my friend, and it wasn't the best experience. It was a 6-bedroom house, and there was mold all through it, and the basement, it wasn't a finished basement, and it's now condemned. And then me and my boyfriend and my daughter, we got an apartment. We were in that apartment for almost a year, and then when it was coming towards the end of the year, Renesmee got really sick, so I took her to the hospital. She was in the hospital for 3 days, and she developed asthma from living in that apartment. It had mold all through the apartment that you couldn't see. So, and she still has asthma now.
I gave them a list of the hours that we did, all the work. The landlord refused it. He said, nope, I want it all. You owe us this much money. You owe us $800 for May's rent. You're gonna pay it. I said, I'm not paying it. Like, I want reimbursement for the stuff that we did for your home. No, it ended in the tenancy officer ordered us to leave the home. We had 9 days.
9 days to vacate the home.
To find another house and move out.
With our children and our dog. We had 9 days to vacate the house.
When we talk about housing, we often think about just the physical structure of a house. And there are health impacts there, whether it's moldy, whether it's got asbestos in it. But a house is also a home. So that psychosocial aspect of housing is equally important, the sense of belonging. Do I have control over decisions in my house? Can I make changes in my house? Is my housing stable? Do I actually either have long-term rental housing where I know I won't get thrown out? Is my housing crowded? That's both a physical factor, but it's an emotional factor. But we know that there's a health impact.
Oh,
it's frustrating.
Very frustrating. I mean, we've never experienced it before. We've never heard tell of Access Nova Scotia ever. Our second youngest daughter, she moved away from home because of the situation we were in for the last 2 months prior to finding this house. Mm-hmm. Brought on a lot of stress between Anne and I, which, unfortunately, it affects the children. Like.
My name is Nancy MacDonald, and I'm Executive Director with Family Service of Eastern Nova Scotia. I'm also one of the founding members of the Men's Health Centre, which is the first and only men's health centre in the province, and it is housed here locally in Antigonish. When I think about affordable housing, from an agency perspective, we certainly see families struggling with finding safe, supportive housing. A gap that we've seen through the Men's Health Centre, and that's the availability of affordable housing for males. Many of these men are also facing mental illness, and the need around safe, affordable housing for adults living with mental illness, particularly males, is also quite high. In Antigonish, Celtic Homes, of which I'm a board member, we recently just opened another house, and I think we provide service to probably well over 25 adults living with mental illness, and there's probably another double that on the waiting list to get in. So in the area of Antigonish Town and County, there's a huge need for affordable housing, as well as we know that there's a wait list to get into the units that are already present.
I have a vision of the future.
What vision?
The Toronto Maple Leafs will not win the Stanley Cup.
Oh, you're not serious.
My name is Jim Mulcahy. I am writer and director of the Park Bench Players. The Park Bench Players are 6 adults who have been living with significant mental illnesses for the better portion of their lives. They are similar to many individuals within Canada who tend to gather on the park benches of their communities.
Somebody suspicious.
Stop being so paranoid, Stacy.
He's supposed to be paranoid.
Yeah.
When we've asked the Park Bench Players what some of their concerns are, their pressing day-to-day concerns, repeatedly they suggest the lack of affordable housing as being an urgent and pressing needs that adds to their stress and lowers their quality of life.
Exactly.
My name is Fran, Nunn, and I suffer from schizophrenia. And I've suffered from schizophrenia for 46 years now, so I'm quite a veteran at it. I've been in the same location now for 20 years, but I may soon be forced to leave this little house, and I may face looking for an apartment. And the problems that I will face are that this is university town, and because it is, a lot of the apartments are more highly priced because of students. The apartments where you pay according to your income are all filled up, and there's no affordable housing for not just those with mental illness, but those who are poorer, those who are disadvantaged. If I have to move, I'll be forced to pay more for a decent apartment. I just don't know how I'm going to be able to afford it. Money will have to come from my food budget. I really don't know.
We know many stories of single males living in apartments and houses that are not safe and experiencing relative poverty. But we've seen an increase through the Men's Health Centre in recent years of dads gaining full custody of their kids. And they are now facing similar situations as single mothers have for a very long period of time. But finding affordable, safe housing where they can raise their kids is becoming increasingly difficult for them, especially if they're trying to stay in this local area. One case that we worked with for a long period of time was a single dad awarded sole custody of his 3 kids. And finances, of course, were a major issue for this family. They were on income assistance. They had to resort to living in a very run-down, awful living situation out in the country. And what ended up happening, they tried to garden, they tried to burn their own wood. It got to the point where Children's Aid became involved over the safety of the children, as they should. And a very sad end to the whole situation was that the oldest was able to move out on her own, and the other 2 were taken into permanent care and custody. It was disheartening in the sense to think that this was a dad who had been awarded custody. He had his kids who wanted to live with him, and if we could have found a way to have them living in an appropriate, safe house where the kids could have thrived, then chances are he would have been able to succeed as in his role as a dad. And it was a very sad situation.
The Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the association of all the towns and cities in Canada, did a national study and found that 43% of households were spending 30% or more of their total income on housing. And that's the figure at which the federal government considers housing to be unaffordable. And 21% of Canadians were spending 50% or more of their income on housing. And that's the point at which experts consider people to be at risk for becoming homeless. But when your family is spending a disproportionate money on housing, they don't have money left for other expenses. There was a huge shift in the 1990s, in part because experts associate that timing with change in federal policy, so that the federal government was investing less in housing. And so in the 5-year period in the early 90s, there had been a 43% shift in affordability of housing. The Wellesley Institute in Toronto, who really pay attention to housing as a determinant of health, associate the change in the percentage of expenditure on housing with the federal government's withdrawal from housing support and the building of affordable housing.
One of the things that drives me to really pursue housing solutions in this community is that I know that there are people who are single-parent families who can't afford the local rents. There are people with disabilities, people cycling on and off welfare because there aren't enough jobs and they can't get enough earnings. All of those people are living in very bad housing now. Well, when you're building a project for people like that, it's hard to recruit support for that because people get into this welfare bashing kind of, people who aren't doing well and they're relying on the government, they're not trying very hard and they should just follow the rules and do what I do, which is get up and work hard every morning. It's not that simple at all.
I've had depression since I was actually a little girl because with my family, we moved probably about 5 times. And since I was living with my mother in Antigonish, we moved at least over 10 times. I've moved, since I've been on my own, I've moved about 5 or 6 times. Packing and just finding money to put in a gas tank to move your stuff, or for finding rent plus damage deposit. It's not a good feeling.
We're going to talk about the agenda of the next
I am the chair of the Antigonish Affordable Housing Society, and what's significant about that is that it is a group that flowed out of the Poverty Reduction Coalition, and because the Poverty Coalition highlighted this really serious need for affordable housing. By the way, affordable has some other dimensions to it. It's not just about cost, it's about location, it's about suitability, it's about, for example, if you need two or three bedrooms, then you need 2 or 3 bedrooms. You're not trying to jam yourself into some kind of accommodation that isn't suited. If you need accessible accommodation, you need accommodation that's accessible. The Society is a group of interested citizens, of whom I am one.
My name is Frank Gallant. I co-chair Sustainable Antigonish. Sustainable Antigonish is a community-based movement looking at moving Antigonish and its surrounding small communities towards living more sustainably. So Katherine and Mike with the Housing Society have been at the round table providing updates and information on the intricacies of housing issues within our community. They've allowed an important dialogue on some issues that haven't been talked openly at the community level, and allowed us to see the complexity and depth of the housing issue.
The university are, as you know, constructing 2 new residences. It was amazing for me to hear that they were doing 1, but they're actually doing 2 residences. Even because there's a downside of that as well. I've actually had a call from someone in the community who said, "You've got to stop the university from ruining this town. They're putting up these new residences and all homes because of what the university is doing.
Yeah. This is what I've been dealing with for years and years, talking about housing need in Antigonish, and I keep coming up against exactly that. Well, we can't do something about affordable housing need because people will lose their shirts.
Some of the culture within this community can be quite conventional. And when we're seeing conventional based attitudes, we're seeing people say things don't need to change. So even if the problem exists and is there in real life, we like to pretend it's not. There's still a lot of denial and non-acceptance that these issues exist. Until people actually experience it with somebody within their home community or for a counsellor within their ward, they don't believe it's there. We often like to call them the modern day invisible problems. Housing and poverty is an issue for the whole community, not just the issue for the housing society.
Our first landlords made a comment that we didn't seem to have much. In fact, I think they're rather poor. They seem to look down on us.
They made a few comments about us being poor people, and we may not have computers and all the technology that he has. We have the necessities to provide for our family. That's all that matters.
I think the individuals that are facing affordable housing issues do not have a strong voice to be able to come forward and speak on that. Most of these individuals are dealing with multiple family issues, so they could be dealing with poverty, they could be dealing with separation and divorce, or multiple dynamic family situations, they could be dealing with unemployment, and so the day-to-day survival becomes all that they can cope with, not coming forward and advocating for themselves for a change in the housing.
The big things for me, and I hear this a lot, is the lack of housing for people with disabilities.
Oh yeah.
There are no public units that I'm aware of that have exclusive wheelchair accessibility and that kind of thing. I think some of the co-op housing has elevators, but not all of them.
Yeah.
And some of them have wheelchair accessible apartments, but not enough. There's a waiting list for those, and there are people in their own homes who can't get this kind of housing that's desperately needed.
My name's Ann Camosi, and I'm a grandmother, mother, wife, artist, entrepreneur, businesswoman, now disabled person. So the interesting thing about our situation is we have a house to live in, but we can't live here. I can't live here because it's out in the country and I can't get wheelchair transport to essential services. Peter can't live here with me because we can't get adequate home care support to support his needs. For me, the issue is that I need to live in a wheelchair apartment, and in Antigonish we have very few wheelchair apartments, and those apartments that are designated wheelchair are not really wheelchair apartments. At least I have tried some, and I can't get my wheelchair into the bathroom, for example. Most people living with disabilities live below the poverty line, especially women living with disabilities, so it makes affordable housing for people with disabilities even more important. There just has not been enough policy and planning around housing in this community, especially for those of us who have disabilities and/or seniors.
Would like to see municipal councillors step forward, see these issues occurring themselves, and not have to hear from 100 to 150 people before they determine that these issues do exist. Some of them don't want to rock the boat, some of them don't want to stick their necks out, but if you are going to step into that role, with it comes a responsibility.
What you've seen over the last number of years is provincial and federal programs that relate to housing, that the funding for those has dried up a bit. So what the town is responsible for is not housing, it's responsible for the quality of the housing to make sure that it meets certain building code and fire code. If an individual feels they have an issue, whether the property doesn't meet the building code that they might be renting or the fire code, they can call the town of Antigonish. And unfortunately, a lot of lower income individuals get stuck with this housing that might be substandard. They are always nervous about calling because they say, look, if I don't live here, where do I live? And I think that part of it is education, because the reality is that under the Tenancies Act in Nova Scotia, if something is substandard, the tenant can't be asked to move out by the landlord. There are protections that are in there. And I think it's about educating individuals to say, you don't have to worry. If something is wrong, report it. It's not going to negatively affect you. The only thing that can happen is that the thing will get fixed.
When you are a landlord, I think your home should be inspected once a year. I think there should be a fee they should have to pay for that reason alone. And at the same time, they're getting protected by doing that. And where tenants move out, leave their frickin' mess behind for these neighbors or holes in the walls like we've seen in the past. That tenants should be accountable. I mean, one way or another, they should be held accountable for their damages. But when you got these landlords that just couldn't care less about you and your family, and other than the almighty dollar, then they should be accountable for their mistakes too.
If you take a look at the large number of sort of co-op housing units that are in the town, are sort of set up in that they decide who their members are, and income isn't one of the criteria. So though we have lots of sort of co-op housing, the amount that's targeted at low-income people is not that great. So I think that is an issue. To be totally honest, we're not getting much interest from developers in sort of doing low-income or mixed or affordable housing.
I'm Issam Kadre, and I'm a real estate developer in Nova Scotia. I've done projects in 4 or 5 communities in Nova Scotia. I've been doing this now for the last 35 years. I did one of the first projects in the affordable housing program when it came out. It was in the first tier, and it's been a successful project. We have 48 units in the 2 projects. It became unattractive for developers to participate in the program because interest rates went down. The requirements for the rent reduction became uneconomical for landlords. They were giving a $25,000 grant, but now with the low interest rates and the rent levels that you have to achieve under affordable housing, it just doesn't make economic sense for a public-private partnership. There are disincentives. It really comes down to dollars and cents. But that's why I think the government really should be doing social housing. They shouldn't be pushing it off on the private sector. You know, the private sector is in business to make money. And if there's no money to be made, then they're not going to provide it.
That couple that was featured in our local newspaper, the Casket, seems to have found a very good resolution to their problem. Someone who found room in their own budget has bought a home for them and is renting it to them for a very reasonable rent.
It's a great house, nice and big. Fell in love with it. The family unit again. Safe environment, clean environment.
It's a place we can call our home, and you know, feels great. And affordable rent.
And it's affordable rent for sure.
Even though the people who bought that house could have bought it and rented it out for top dollar, instead they're getting personal satisfaction knowing that they're helping a family who was having a really hard time.
I would say I'm comfortable living here. Yeah, I would say it's a lot better financially living here than any of the other places where I live. My daughter, she likes it better. She said thank you to me when we moved here. She said thank you.
Bye! So our new initiative is to use this funding opportunity from the Rural Communities Foundation of Nova Scotia to find creative strategies to build new complexes, starting probably with a 10-unit complex that will be an affordable, good quality building that is energy efficient, and we're hoping to have gardens outside in case our tenants would like to grow some food.
How much money is missing? Housing advocates in Nova Scotia are welcoming the provincial government decision to create a long-term affordable housing strategy. They say it's an important move because about 18,000 households spend more than half their money on shelter. The first of 7 public meetings will take place on Saturday. And that's the news from the CBC, serving Nova Scotia.
What this is about is talking to community, talking to individuals, getting their opinion because they have the experience, they're in the grassroots level, they know what the needs are.
And developing the next projects that down the road.
We are actually the first government in the history of Nova Scotia that has committed to a housing strategy. We are moving in the direction that we should have been doing maybe 10, 20 years ago, but at least we are going now in the right direction.
With the volunteer board who needs. We're hoping that new government strategy was going to put us in a better position to address the need. But if it doesn't have serious money attached to it, it's not going to put us in any better position to develop affordable housing.